For joining us tonight. Welcome to our webinar, Christus, Vivit. What does this mean for ministry with young adults? Part 2 and part 1 in our series we held earlier in May, and we invited Sister Natalie, the Director of Youth Evangelization and Vocations of the French Bishop's Office, and Chris Russo, who represented the Byzantine Catholic Church at the pre-synod meeting in Rome. And so they unpacked Christus Vivit for us. If you want the links to those, we'll share them with you when we're finished. And now we're going to do kind of a deep dive into Christus Vivit and unpack what this really means for ministry with young adults, particularly in the United States. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We wanted to make an evening time to accommodate people who are working during the day and those that are on different time zones. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to be blinded by the sun going down here. I just realized that. Then I'm going to get up in a second and switch that once we do introductions. Welcome. I'm Tracy Lamont. I'm Assistant Professor of Religious Education at the Loyola Institute for Ministry at Loyola University here in New Orleans. Before coming to Loyola, I served as a parish youth and young adult minister and worked as a high school teacher as well. I'm also a member of the USCCB National Advisory Team on Young Adult Ministry. And I'm also your co-moderator today with Paul Jarzembowski. Paul Jarzembowski works for the United States Conference of Bishops, and he as the Assistant Director for Youth and Young Adult Ministry for the Secretariat of Laity, Marriage, Family Life, and Youth. Paul also serves as a staff liaison for the USCCB National Advisory Team on Young Adult Ministry and is the United States Coordinator for World Youth Day. Welcome, Paul.
Good to be here.
And next we have Diana Hancharenko, who is the young adult minister at Angela Merici Parish in Youngstown, Ohio, where she's been serving the last 3.5 years. She earned her master's degree in pastoral studies from the Loyola Institute for Ministry in 2011 and has worked in parish young adult ministry and evangelization for the past 10 years. Diana also serves as the chair of the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops National Advisory Team on Young Adult Ministry. Welcome, Diana.
Thanks for having me.
Then we have Darius Villalobos. He serves as the Director of Multicultural Ministry for the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministry, NFCYM. He previously served in the Archdiocese of Chicago in a variety of ministry roles, including youth ministry, young adult ministry, and catechesis. He currently serves on the National Advisory Team for Young Adult Ministry of the USCCB with us. He was born and raised in Chicago and is a graduate of DePaul University, where he received his bachelor's degree in English and Catholic Studies. He has served as a parish RCIA director, liturgical music minister, retreat director, and youth minister. And he lives in Chicago with his wife. Welcome, Darius.
Thank you. Happy to join you all tonight.
And then finally, last but obviously never least in the entire world, we have Nick Stein, who currently serves as the program manager for Bon Secours Young Adults, the ministry of the Sisters of Bon Secours in Marriottsville, Maryland. Nick also serves as a member of the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops National Advisory Team on Young Adult Ministry. So we are representing a good portion of our team today from the USCCB, and we are very, very pleased to have you all here. And I welcome everyone that is included in our audience. I hope everybody sees the little chat bar down there. If you don't, you can just hit the arrow and expand it. A couple folks have already started talking down there. Mine wasn't expanded. But please write in as we go. Nick's going to help us facilitate today the questions. So this is going to be, we're hosting very much a very open dialogue with all of you today. And so we're going to get started and we're going to give some introductory remarks, some quick comments on what it means to implement a papal exhortation, and then kind of go into a deep dive with chapter 7 and really explore what this means for ministry leaders, for people working in religious education and parish settings, a variety of settings. But we really encourage you to join us with this. So type in questions, comments. We have a few questions from the registration page that we'll put forward for those that asked because they couldn't make it. So I'll open up. Paul and I were going to kind of briefly open this up, and we had talked the other day, what does it actually mean? So I put quotes around, what does it mean to implement a papal exhortation? And how does this gathering in Rome affect a person's ministry locally? What does all this mean? Paul, I'm going to throw it to you and close my shades real quick.
Sure, no problem. So, one of the things that you have this exhortation, and it was made in Rome. It was, you're usually going to get your copy from the U.S. Bishops Conference, so in Washington, D.C., and then it's going to arrive on your desk, and no matter where you're from, whether you're from England or Hawaii or Cincinnati or anywhere else around the country, around the world, what does this have to do with you? And I think one of the things that we think we have to realize is that this in a way, this exhortation is really just at the halfway point of the synodal process. So in a way, what we're doing here is engaging you in a process that began 3 years ago, and that will probably go on for the next several years. And as we continue to talk, we're trying to figure out how best to do ministry in the local context. The Holy Father's got some inspiring things to say. The young people who gathered in Rome last year had inspiring things to say. And so that's really there to kind of give us a starting point. But ultimately, where it really matters is what the Pope's inspiring words say, and his insights into human nature, into the church, into young people, how they connect to the reality on the ground in your area. So, so what does it mean? It means that what your experience is like is really what matters now. Now is the time when your experience matters most. And we're just here to guide you through what some of those inspiring words that the Holy Father had to offer us, how that can really trigger for you what's really going to matter. Because that's where this is, the Holy Father's document is not the end, but it's rather the halfway point of a journey. And what you're doing in the local area is really where the true work begins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree, Paul. Thank you for that. It reminds me of when the encyclical came out, Rejoice and Be Glad, and some folks were using that here in the Archdiocese. They were using it as certificate renewal courses, kind of training courses and things like that. And it was really beautiful, it just as kind of like a refresh. So especially if people are offering any kind, and we'll get into this probably in a minute, any kind of like certificate renewal courses or any kind of small group book studies and things like that. This is a really beautiful document to bring to a very, very local level. So, and if anyone can help out with unpacking that, we'll certainly be here to try with that. So thanks, Paul. Thank you for that. I'm going to turn now to talk about, we're going to go through step by step. And again, we're going to kind of 2 by 2 discuss particular aspects of the exhortation. So Diana and I are going to talk from the context of parishes and academic institutions. And Diana, you're more than welcome. Do you want to take it away? It's up to you.
Sure. Yeah, I don't mind getting started. Actually, kind of, based off of what Paul was just saying about implementation of this, of this exhortation, this stuff has to come alive and it has to come off the paper. And, especially as we focus on chapter 7, and as, I'm looking right now, I have my copy down here highlighted, 204, the young make us see the need for new styles and strategies. And that sounds great. This is stuff that we've all wanted to hear. These are things that we know that have been needed and that we want to see happen. I can tell you, for being in the parish setting for 3.5, almost 4 years, and we've been at young adult ministry, for really that long, now that things are starting to happen and changes are starting to come to life, people are starting to have more questions and they're starting to have a little bit more resistance. I shared with the team the other day that I had someone, a longstanding parishioner, come in my office a couple weeks ago and say, I didn't think it would look like this. And it was really this sense of, oh my goodness, what's happening? Which in a sense is really good, and we know that changes need to be made, but change can also be really scary. So finding ways of figuring out these new approaches of ministry, figuring out ways of relationship building versus simply recruitment, which is a theme that has been ongoing through many of these webinars that we've done. It's really going to cause a lot of challenges and a lot of people saying, oh my goodness, what's really happening here? As opposed to young adults just kind of, coming in and neatly taking their place. We're warned that this is going to be messy, but I don't think we realize really how messy this is going to be and what that mess is actually going to look like. But yet we're all going to be okay. Everything is going to be fine. The Holy Spirit is guiding us, and under good leadership and understanding that that it does kind of get beyond just the excitement of this, and as the rubber hits the road, There are some big challenges that do come up, in terms of communication, in terms of style of leadership, ideas that come up. Something at our parish at St. Angela Merici here is that we have young adults who are present in leadership now. We have young adults both on our parish council and on our finance council. And I think there were some people who thought that they were just there just to be young adults, young people on the council. But now that they have fresh ideas and now that they have, things that they want to bring forward, everyone's just kind of like, oh my goodness, wait a minute. So, but finding ways for us to be church together in the midst of this implementation, finding ways of just new ways of being together. There's going to be some trial and error in this, and that's okay. And that's what's supposed to happen. So it's easy to get discouraged as this implementation begins, as ideas happen. But I think if we stick with it and just kind of learn from what we need to do and what we're seeing, and we'll get there. We'll continue to get there, and it's an ongoing process. I don't think there's a set arrival on this. But it's just an ongoing process. And I think that that's very important to keep in mind, especially as we implement on the parish level. And so Tracy, I'm sure you'll talk about what that's like kind of on the institutional level.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking a lot of those things as you were talking is, just in terms of change in general, like institutional organizational change is messy. And I think that in when we read, 204 about, things needing to be flexible, that's what messy kind of means, like being able to be adaptive to challenges when they do come up, when these questions do come up of like, well, I didn't want to think about it that way. We wanted to keep going a different direction, things like that. And so the key takeaway of a lot of what I'm hearing just now from what you were saying, for me personally, is that when we do invite young adults in, when we've gotten through that step, how do we handle organizational change when that happens? Because that's a very, very real reality anytime something changes in a parish structure, any organizational structure. And so not to lose sight of that, because there's a beautiful vision mapped out before us about walking with and accompanying young people, but without that real institutional piece, a lot of that can become kind of frustrating sometimes, and wondering where to turn next, sort of a thing. So yeah, I don't know if I don't want to speak for you at all, but that's what I was just reflecting on as you mentioned some of those things.
No, absolutely. And I think that's a big part of it. And I think if we're really getting at the heart of what these changes in styles and changes in strategies mean, it's not just a change in packaging. It's not just a change in appearance. Right. Change in heart. It's a conversion experience. It's something just ongoing that's going to cause, some growing pains. So it can't just be all the surface stuff. If this stuff is really going to get in, and if we're going to go deeper into what Pope Francis is talking about and what we've been hearing from our young people, it's got to go just beyond that appearance thing. And I think that, that's part of what you were hitting on. And I know certainly that's what we've experienced here.
Yeah. It's like, how does pastoral council, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, well, like in the document itself, Pope Francis talks like in 216, he calls out, we need to make all our institutions, our parishes better equipped. In 221, he talks about schools are in urgent need of self-criticism. So, I mean, he's calling out both parishes and schools. But, it's interesting. So first of all, they're not going to be able to respond very well. Well, there's going to be that challenge of responding when young people step forward and really step forward, and not just in a token way. Are there other ways that you think that there'll be that Pope Francis is calling out schools, universities, parishes? That what is self-criticism going to be about? Like, how do you see that? I mean, is that?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe you can or can't answer at this point, but.
No, I can do my best.
Thank you.
I can definitely do my best. We were having a chat on the way over. I've had a whole host of ideas, and sometimes when you're driving in the car the same route every day, something new comes to you in your mind. It's when you're doing mundane things that you get your insights, I've learned. And so in the drive over here for tonight, I started to think really critically. I'm thinking on my experiences of working with, where I work, I teach in a graduate program, and we have a master's degree in religious education. So by and large, the students in that program are catechists, DREs, and Catholic school teachers. And so I work really deeply with them on curriculum development. And I hear from them very often that we have this curriculum, we have this bishop's framework in the United States that is, but we're supposed to be teaching. And what Pope Francis is calling on us to do, and you read an excellent quote right there. What was the number that you just read? Was it 212?
I think 221 for the schools.
221, 21, yeah.
That's for you. That's for
Yeah.
you.
And, and so what he's really calling out here is that, and when we read through the documents, Catechesis Tradendae and, Evangelii Gaudium, we read through all of these things in our courses about how catechesis comes after a deep encounter with Christ. And very often, sometimes in our parishes, with confirmation preparation, with, sometimes confirmation preparation in high schools as well, is that the catechesis is coming before that encounter. It's assumed that a young person has had an encounter with Christ. And so now it's time to teach them. And so that's part of it, is backtracking and making sure that there has been an experience of God that has been uncovered and unearthed in a young person, and that inquiry and that desire is then formed to learn more. But catechesis, and what Pope Francis is saying, is that these doctrinal formulations should never come across as doctrinal formulations, and so it doesn't remove catechesis. And some people could be nervous about this, of like, I have to teach the bishop's framework, I have to teach the book I'm given in my PSR or my parish school religion or CCD, whichever one people are calling it in their contexts. I have to teach that, and while that content will not change, the content of our faith does evolve. It does certainly, our tradition has evolved over time, and we read it in new light all the time, but there are, elements that we do want to pass on in terms of, religious truths and things like that. But it's the approach. And so you can teach the framework, you can teach content with a completely ministerial and pastoral approach of listening and accompaniment. And so just through a pedagogy of inquiry, or a problem-based, or, starting off with, Tom Groom does a lot of this, of bringing life to faith. And that's a similar idea, is like cracking open the lived experience of the young people that are in front of you, and then seeing where God is present there first, and then drawing from the tradition to unpack that for them, instead of coming with the tradition first, and so I think that's what I'm hearing, very, very strongly. And they also, he writes in 210 about outreach, that, young adults have to be, encouraged and given the freedom to be enthused about evangelizing other people. So we're called to give them spaces where they can actually talk about their faith with other people. And again, when I go back into the context of academia, and what we're teaching, there's a lot of content often taught, but are we teaching pedagogy and curriculum development? The people that are in front of you, the students that you have, and the setting that you are in, is as much as a part of your curriculum as the bishop's framework is. And some people don't acknowledge, or don't understand that the students' experiences that they're bringing to them frames how you approach that curriculum. And I think, and that's a curriculum development theory, and sometimes that's what's lost in academic settings, is just, here's the content, here's the theology. And so that's what I'm hearing, is that it is doable. This is not a role reversal. It is in many ways, but it's not, because curriculum development should always be about the whole person, and I think we've lost our way sometimes with that, in teaching more, like in having tests. The other idea was like, have the students involved in the assessment process. What projects do they want to utilize to show what they know? Does it have to be some kind of multiple choice test after every unit? What other ways can a young person truly engage their faith and show they are embracing their faith, not that they know intellectually what the faith entails? And that's what Pope Francis is also calling us. And so those are my reflections from an academic context.
Great. Yeah, Tracy, I'm gonna interrupt you, because that's my job tonight, is to interrupt you, and to read out comments and questions from the sidebar. So our friend Chris over in England had a great comment here, agreeing with Diana about the conversion experience. And he's really interested in how we create moments of encounter, or how we can create moments of encounter, and he gives as the example the intergenerational moments of encounter that happened in the synod, where people realize that young adults have a lot to offer. I think that, even beyond just I think there's a fascinating question there about the intergenerational encounters or experiences of encounter. But I think just that general question of experience of encounter, beyond places like a privileged place of the synod, I think those things happen But let's just dive into that a little bit more. Diana, all of us in our different ministerial contexts have created those places of encounter. What goes into that? Because I think it goes to what you're saying there in an academic context too, Tracy, which is a big part of how this plays out, right? Pope Francis isn't just talking about the parish context, but he's talking about all the different contexts in which people encounter church life and encounter Christ. So what are the things that you want to highlight about or help our audience to know in terms of how do you create those cultures of encounter? Like what happens there? What are the pieces that go into that? Any of you?
I think, one of the things that I'm experiencing at the parish setting is really working hard to create those moments of encounter and really kind of almost inserting the young adults into different experiences that are intergenerational. I'm really paying very close attention. I see this as part of my role as young adult minister is to be advocate and to make sure that that people are paying attention, that we are here, and that we're not just to be ignored. And I'm really seeking out right now a lot of opportunities for collaboration. We just did like a creative kind of art experience. We called it a paint and pray. And we partnered our young adult
on Facebook.
That was really cool. We partnered with our women's Bible study group. And we had a great, almost equal parts of young adults and some of our more established women in the parish to come together for an evening. And it was a great night of relationship building. It was a great night of conversations and sharing this type of experience. And also just, making sure that, hey, don't forget about the young adults. I know that there's many people who talked about, the preferential option for the young adult, for the young person. And so making sure that is part of my responsibility as young adult minister is to make sure that I am that advocate. Making sure that our pastor did have names of young adults for our finance council and for our pastoral council of people who really were, have that skill set, that gift set to bring something to those leadership positions. So really being familiar with the young adults that I work with, finding and seeking opportunities, getting creative about that. And, oftentimes too, being persistent. I think that there's a lot of times where, a lot of groups say that they want young people involved, but maybe not, necessarily in the particular way that we're thinking. So trying to, be persistent and just make sure that, that young adults are able to be present. Seek out those opportunities for collaboration, especially when it comes to intergenerational ministry, and just kind of keep at it in terms of that persistence.
And I would, and I don't want to cut anybody else off, but I would, it reminded me when you said the paint and pray, it reminds me of it's like the ceramics, like sipping ceramic or something, whatever. I went to one, but and then I read, paragraph 210 where it says, whether when the message is first brought up, whether in a youth retreat, a conversation at a bar, on school holidays, or in any of God's mysterious ways, it can awaken deep experience of faith. And that's what encounter means. And so to me, what I'm hearing in the document, what I'm hearing from your experience, Diana, is so naming the encounter where it happens. And it's not always in a church setting, and so those moments where people are coming together in a very relaxed and very relational way. When I look back on my earlier young adult years, because I've got 1 year left, according to U.S. bishops, and I'm sticking to that one. But, when I look back on my early young adult years, I literally had conversations at a bar with coworkers of mine where we just talked about religion, and it was deeply meaningful. And I thought, is this bad? And I wondered, and I look back on it now, I was like, those were moments of encounter. I was encountering those people in their lives and they were encountering me, and so and I loved reading that from the Pope, and so go ahead. I wanted to affirm a lot of what you were saying.
Thank you.
Well, and the other aspect that I'm particularly drawn to in Chris's question is the intergenerational piece of where are those settings in church? Well, first of all, for those who are going to church, are there ways to transform the existing ministries that involve older adults and younger adults? Are there creative ways of engaging them? I recall an example when I was working in a parish in young adult ministry. We had a Bible study that everybody over the age of 65 would go to, but nobody younger than that would ever attend. So we did a specific outreach to the young adults to attend, and we would have a special like pre-event and post-event sometimes during the Bible study, or beforehand. Like we'd have like meet for drinks and then head over to the church, and then have a small group within the Bible study just for the young adults. And then when they went to the large group, they would engage intergenerationally with it. So there was that part where they had their own unique time, but then during the rest of the Bible study, they were able to engage intergenerationally. So it kind of gave a little bit of a snippet for both, because some young people really like the intergenerational thing and some maybe avoid it. So by giving a little bit of both for people gives them an opportunity. Like if you're there for just the peer gathering, you get that, but then you also get an opportunity to have the intergenerational piece. And that's a way in which, and again, it's helpful if the leaders of the community can prep the older members of the community to be mentors, to join them in that. So I think that outside of the Synod Hall, I think in parishes and in different settings, intergenerational experiences are possible. It does take work though, because we often, young people silo themselves, older people silo themselves, either intentionally or unintentionally. And so we'll take some work to kind of move past that, but there are ways to do it, which doesn't I think the unintentional way is, well, it was posted in the bulletin, why didn't any young adults show up to it? There was an intergenerational opportunity they could have come to. Now, you got to do a little bit of trying to engage them there and find creative ways of integrating them. That it will take a little extra work. So that's the bad news for anyone who likes it, who's liking a silver bullet, is that it will take some intentionality on the part of leaders to try and find connection points in a local parish or a diocese where that can happen.
Yeah. I'll just add to it that I think one of the key pieces in all of this is the encounter of Christ and the other, and the importance of stories as being a key part of how that encounter takes place. We don't have a culture where we really have helped people be able to tell their story, witness to their own faith journey of how they have experienced and encountered Christ in their own life. And we really need to create spaces to do that, because I think that's where a lot of that intergenerational exchange can take place. And me telling my story, that opens up an opportunity for someone else to reflect on their own and hopefully be able to share their story as well. And so I think that's a real key piece in this, especially from the intergenerational perspective. How are we equipping those from different generations to be able to share that story of their own encounter, to speak and give voice to it, and then encounter others in that same story and journey that we're having? I think if we're going to really take seriously what Pope Francis is saying here, it really does require some self-reflection first, so that we can better articulate what our encounter has been. And oftentimes that will invite other people to their own encounter as well.
Yeah. So follow up on that. Sorry, Paul.
No, go ahead.
To follow up on that, we have this great question from Christy Cavanis here that's getting to that point, Darius. It's about talking about organizational change and self-criticism in parishes, in schools, in the church, self-criticism in the church. And how can that happen? The question she's asking is, how do we, what needs to happen, or how can those processes begin? A number of you work at a very high level organizational change and have walked through some of these things. How do you help a parish, or how do you help a school, or even just a parish minister or a diocese maybe? How do you help them to walk through a process of self-criticism? If you've ever done that before, how does that happen? What's the groundwork that needs to be laid to do that kind of process? Do you have an answer for that one?
Yes.
I think
Hey,
we all do.
Okay, we all do. That's good.
We all have an answer for this one. Let's go in order here. Go ahead, Diana.
Okay. The one thing that I think has been really helpful in terms of making organizational change is using stories. and also diving deeper into reasons why. And I really challenge, people at the parish. I've also done this with, some other groups and some other people that I've worked with, that, if they come up with a reason for something about, well, young people just aren't coming. Okay, well, so let's go a little bit deeper on this. Oh, they say they're really busy. Okay, well, let's go a little bit deeper on this. And I think that this is really where the synod process can really bear a lot of good fruit for us. And as we're talking about, the synod experience is not just this one-off listening experience, but can we continue to gain stories from these young people about how they're engaging, why they are engaging, why they're not engaging, what's going on in a parish community. Like, for me, if I find, if we put out an invitation for somebody or for some event or something, and we only, get 5 people. Well, first of all, I'm going to ask the 5 people, well, what brought you in today? But then the rest of the people on the list that I have a relationship with, I'm going to say, hey, what was going on? Did you just have something else planned for that night? So keeping really good communication. And then also I relay that communication back to our staff, to our councils, to our other groups that are part of things. Because then that kind of banishes the culture of dismissal, of just being dismissive of, oh, well, they're just busy, or, oh, they're just not interested. Okay, what's really going on here? Because there's always reasons that are kind of underlying. And that, that just, I think that just that story of the stories of what we're getting from our young people, I think that needs to be an ongoing process. And we also have to keep sharing them, and then that really sparks organizational change, especially in leadership of, oh my gosh, yeah, well, there is a big reason for this, or there's this going on. Sometimes it's minor adjustments, and sometimes it creates a larger conversation that's a lot more complicated. But I think this ongoing process of listening has to be ongoing, and it has to be shared, and just kind of breaking down those walls of communication.
It reminds me of the phrase we use in the National Dialogue, and in Parker Palmer and other people that use it, turn to wonder. Whenever you are unsure, whenever you feel a critique coming up, whenever you think and it could have been a misunderstanding, turn to wonder, ask yourself. And that's that whole process of, like, we'll get into in a little bit here, I think, when we talk about listening and accompaniment and how often you have to listen. But that's an ongoing day-to-day process, and it's a framework of living your life, of living in ministry, of constantly turning to wonder what's really going on, and then actually seeking that out, and the one that I would chime in with from we were going to go in order. Paul, go ahead. Sorry. I get so excited about this.
No, ladies first. I'll be happy to follow you.
I get so jazzed up. You got to tell me to stop talking.
No, go for it.
Nick, when you were asking that question about the change that needs to happen, kind of the self-criticism that needs to happen, I will bring up the National Dialogue for this, because one of the processes, and there's, I think, the link, if you go in the chat bar, there's the link to this. One of the processes of implementing this synod has been, first of all, getting these ministry leaders, getting your staff together to have an open conversation with these facilitated questions. And that when that does happen, a lot of walls break down. And from my experience doing this twice now, I have encountered this with ministry leaders that they want to transform their community, but they were very unable to come together and figure out how to do it together with all of the different kind of ideologies, approaches, and everybody feels their approach is the best approach. And when you want to change that, it's a personal thing, and it kind of hits you deep. And so the process of facilitating a dialogue with ministry leaders is very transformative. And even the ones that I have worked with have said, we are now in relationship with one another because of this 4-hour session. It doesn't need to be 4 hours, but ours was. Because of this, we are now in a deeper, like, they accompany one another now in a way that they had not thought to do before. And so just the process of hosting a very not structured, but a real facilitated dialogue with ministry leaders. And then you take what you've heard and you say, this is what we did. These are the 4 points that you believe young adults in this community need desperately. And they're the points that we've heard through the synod process, but they had to identify it personally for the people in their settings, and they did through this process, and it was beautiful. And now we're working on our next steps of that. So that to me was a way of kind of breaking down and getting into that self-criticism as the question was posed.
And I would just simply, and I'm just going to speak, I'm your USCCB staff person here. So you're talking about structural organizational change, and I'm talking about, from Mr. Structure, Mr. Organization here. One of the things that I would encourage is, the things where I feel like this can happen great is somehow seeing if there can be some way in your local community, whether it's in your diocese or your region or deanery, to have some sort of presbyteral meeting. I'm going to name the elephant in the room. Many of our pastors are the gatekeepers. Many of our pastors are the decision makers. And I know that many lay staff are certainly engaged in that, but our pastors are critical to this. And so encouraging in your local area some sort of presbyteral conversation. Maybe it's a regional gathering of priests, maybe it's a diocesan gathering. And if there is if you're sitting there saying, well, I'm just a parish person, how could I affect this? Maybe talk to your diocese. If you're a diocesan person and you're wondering, how can I make this happen? Call me up. I'm actually going around the country this year talking to different presbyteral councils about Christus Vivit and trying to open doors in different ways to help pastors see how this can aid them in their ministry, and so that there won't be any potential roadblocks in the way for all this. So work with the structures that exist within your region, your parish, your diocese. Use them. And and here I am. I'm talking about, I live my life in the structural world. I'm Mr. Institution here, and yet that can help us out. Like, lean into the institutional realities of our church. And if somebody in a role can assist, so again, if you're a parish person, talk to your diocesan level staff, and many of them are on this webinar. I'm sure they would love to be able to help out and see if there's roadblocks that they might know how to get in touch with. And there's different ways. So use the structures that exist. And if you're having a hard time figuring out what those structures are, be in touch with us and see if we can help you.
Yeah.
I'm happy to help you navigate those complicated structures that we've built up. They've been built up for wonderful reasons, but they could be a little intimidating for those who are wondering how to navigate them. So
I think we actually have a really good model in Christus Vivit and in our own church in regards to doing this kind of organizational change. It's something that is very common, but Pope Francis uses a different kind of language in this document, but it's basically the See, Judge, Act model. In Christus Vivit, he refers to it as recognize, interpret, and choose. But I think it's very much the same idea that we have to start from a place of first really listening and understanding what our reality is, then making an assessment and asking the right questions and the hard questions about not just what are we doing or not doing, but why aren't we doing those things? What's the why behind all of the things that we've put in place in our structures? And then asking the question, is this really the best way that's serving what we're called to do as mission? And at the key in all of this, it's about getting us back to how are we living out the mission of the church in our day-to-day work. And then finally, if we're going to act, it's not just about having clear goals and objectives in place, but it's also making sure we have good accountability structures in that. And so how do we hold each other accountable in that process of trying to live into those actions that we're committing to as a community? And so I look at how Pope Francis just sort of phrases that, and he's giving us a model of how to do this kind of change. And he's talking about it in the context of what young people can do. But I think this document does a really great job of balancing a message to young people as well as a message to the entire church. And we can pull from our own wisdom to know how to do that. I think the most important thing is we have to be intentional if we're going to do this kind of process to make sure we're committed to that change. And I think in a lot of cases, the reason that change doesn't happen is that we say all the right things that we want to do this, but we're not committed to and we're not honest about the fact that if that change is going to really happen, everybody has to be on board and committed to seeing that through. It's uncomfortable, it's messy, but it's a part of who we're called to be as church, especially if we're called to be prophetic in any way.
And what's not messy? You know, I wonder when messy became a negative thing. You know, I mean, your faith journey is sometimes a mountain you're climbing with a boulder on it, you know, like, and sometimes it seems like smooth sailing, but it's a journey, you know, and messy is flexible. Messy is trial and error, you know? Yeah.
Maybe that moves us on to our next kind of phase here, which is this radical and synodal ministry. You know, so by the way, this is, you know, I kind of volunteered to kind of introduce this part here, mostly for therapeutic reasons. When Pope Francis calls for a synodal experience of pastoral care, of ministry, he has in there one of these paragraphs that Mr. Institution here gets, you know, you're talking before, you know, institutions, we like things in nice boxes and clear processes that we can follow and replicate. It's beautiful. But in Pope Francis says in that section that beginning chapter 7, you know, he says that young people have really no use for this perfectly planned things, that there needs to be a messiness. It needs to be synodal. Now, what does that mean? So Pope Francis describes in Christus Vivit synodality as being on the move, that pastoral care, that really what we call young adult ministry needs to be, I like this image. So I'm kind of digging into this field hospital imagery that Pope Francis has used. He's used it throughout his pontificate, that the thing the church needs most is to heal the wounds. I see the church as a field hospital after battle. But interestingly, it's not just the field hospital that's in a stationary place, but that it's moving. So in a way, just imagine, you know, I'm going to date myself, but like if you're thinking of this as like MASH, like, you know, like the MASH unit moving with the battle, and you're, you know, you're healing the wounds as you're going, as they're experiencing it, which is, you know, it's messy, it flows strange, it's not as organized, but synodal pastoral ministry means that any ministry we do with youth or young adults has to be done. It's on the move. You're walking with them, not necessarily with you. It's pastoral care, not just catechesis, not just event-driven ministry, but pastoral care. So you're healing the wounds and you're on the go. And when you're in that process, if you think of yourself as the mobile MASH unit, then that really transforms the way you see ministry with youth or young adults, you know, because we often think people come to us, but rather we go to them and we walk with them and we're running alongside them sometimes. And so that to me is a radicalness of redefining how we do ministry, because it gives us a whole new definition.
Absolutely.
Darius, I don't know if you were going to jump in, but I was at a follow-up for Paul.
Yeah.
Paul, as a follow-up from the sidebar here from the chat, is the idea that Pope Francis has repeated a number of times, but I think this is where it comes into play in terms of really understanding it. He said, reality is greater than ideas. It's one of his catchphrases, right? You know,
Yeah.
I think this is where that reality is greater than ideas comes really. How do you understand that, especially in this context of pastoral care being synodal, or just in context of pastoral care in general? What does Pope Francis really mean when he says reality is greater than ideas?
I think if you go kind of reverse, first, what does ideas mean? When I think we come in ministry, we have all these great ideas, like this is what I think young adults want. This is, you know, I've read these statistics and this seems to be what it is. Reality is actually listening to the young people. Now, statistics and sociology have their place, and I'm glad that they're there. But if you cling to that, and if you go with your preconceptions, your ideas of what you think, maybe even if you are, if you're a 40-some like me, and you remember back to your 20-somethings 20 years ago, and you try and say, well, when I was a 20-something, this is what I experienced. So that's your idea of what young people want. But if you're not actually listening to the young people today, right in front of you, then you're putting your ideas, your concepts, your preconceptions greater than the reality that is right in front of you. And so that can be very dangerous, because I've encountered in parishes and dioceses a lot of people saying, well, when I was young, this is what happened. So I don't know why young people today don't do this, because when I was their age, this is what I did. That's your idea. So when Pope Francis says that reality is greater than ideas, I think what he's saying is that the lived experience of the young person in front of you is what is most important. And you can use your experience, your background, your ideas, but only at the service of the reality that God has put in front of you. And so I think that's what it comes to. And if you and one of the interesting things is in Christus Vivit, you see that, right, the chapter 3 really comes out to me is that's some of the realities that Pope Francis saw on the global scale. So migration, he saw, poverty, he saw the abuse crisis. These are realities that are right in front of him. If he was talking about ideas, he would be talking about a whole other host of things. But he instead, the synodal process allowed him and the synod fathers to see the reality of people around the world. And that's kind of laid out for us in a really quick fashion in chapter 3. So that is his way of showing that the reality was greater than any idea that he had come up with. Because if you read some of the pre documents that led up to the synod, they had a couple of ideas. Those didn't make it into Christus Vivit. Some of them didn't. So, and I think that's where Pope Francis and the Synod Fathers said, oh, this reality is actually greater than anything we had thought of. So.
Right. Yeah. If I could just chime in super quick on this too, on this sense of reality versus, I can give you like a kind of a real life example. In working in a parish and working in parish ministry, we like to think that we're talking about messiness, we're talking about ministry going beyond events, ministry going beyond office hours. So I had a pretty quiet day at the parish today. But then I get home and I'm throwing laundry in and my phone rings and it's a young adult letting me know that she got laid off of work today. And so that reality of, that this doesn't hold business hours, and this is a new style of ministry too, that it's not just, just events that we're planning. It's not just these neat little boxes that things fit into. I'm glad that she called me, and I'm so glad that she felt that, that we could talk about this, and that she wants to, to tap into her parish community during this difficult time. So having that sense of availability is part of the reality now. It's part of, as we're talking about pastoral care, if we're talking about all of these things, it's not going to happen Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, just in that sense. And there's challenge in that. And, there's some boundaries that need to be set. That's a whole other webinar. But just the realities of, just getting into these realities. And, if we're saying that this is a great idea, that we need new styles, that we need to look into things, that the reality means that this is, challenging work, and it's going to look way different. And somebody looking in, in my window of what I'm doing in the office versus what's happening when I'm, throwing a load of laundry in, it may not add up to people, but are we, but we still got to push forward, and we still have to go through with that.
And that's that whole
Pope Francis
ministry.
says, like, oh, yeah, see here, yeah, sorry. No, I was just going to add a quick thing that, like, actually ahead in the document, Pope Francis says in 297, time is greater than space, and it's a phrase he's used over and over again, and that again would say that, yeah, this is my space at the moment. I'm doing laundry, but no, your time is the most valuable thing that you can give. Not even the space we provide the young people, but the time we give them to listen to them and to hear that reality that they're facing. So thank you, by the way, for doing that. And if you were late for this webinar, we would have totally understood, because time is greater than even this space here.
I'll just add to it that I think there's a good turn of phrase there too, that I wouldn't just say ideas, but I think a reality is greater than ideal. And so sometimes we try and work within the ideal setting of what our ministry should look like and how people should go about their faith journey. And the reality is that for most people, that's not how it works. There's a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of brokenness in our lives, in our personal situations. And so we have to deal with the reality. Going back to that example of a field hospital, we can't have a conversation about somebody about their high cholesterol if they're currently have an open wound that's bleeding out. That needs to be addressed first and foremost. The ideal would be that they're perfectly healthy and that everything is working both externally and internally. But the truth is, we know that unless we address those wounds, those immediate concerns and needs, the rest of the stuff isn't going to matter. And we as the doctors, the professionals, are not going to have any credibility if we're not addressing what is most important to them right now. What's causing the immediate pain? What's causing the immediate concern? And I think that really changes the way that we have to approach it, because that's not the ideal. That's not how we often read in the textbooks or are told, this is how ministry works. And that pushes us outside of our comfort zone. But we have to recognize for many of these young adults, they already are outside of their comfort zone. Even just being present to us, being part of our community, can sometimes be them going outside of their periphery. So we really need to be attentive to that.
And it can't just be the wound that we perceive for them, but rather the real wound that they have, which could very well, sometimes we think their wound is moral or spiritual, but their wound may be actually physical. They may be, they may have mental health issues. They may have, there may be, physical reasons. So I think we can't also prejudge what we think their biggest wound is, because I've also seen that, like, oh yeah, I'm administering to their biggest wound. Is that really their biggest wound, or is that what you perceive their biggest wound? Again, listening would. And of course, I'm not doing that by talking. So Tracy wanted to talk. So
no, it's fine. I wanted to make what I was hearing as a connection between all three of these conversations, which I thought was really beautiful. And I know we have to move on. I don't want to fill the space with my voice. But, when you started, Paul, you were talking about how statistics can often kind of drive our narratives. And that very often throughout the last few years, especially with certain statistical analysis, we've been hearing from a lot of people in public spaces that young people are a problem to be solved, and that's that mentality that has been driving ministry for so long of here's the problem, the statistics are showing us the problem, now create a program that addresses the problem. And that has not been working by and large. I mean, some programs are wonderful, I'm not saying that, but by and large, that approach hasn't been working. So instead of a problem to be solved, what gifts are they offering to our community? And you will not know those gifts until you have listened to them, and when we talk about ministry and relationships, that's exactly what Diana is saying, is that ministry is a relationship. And so yes, at night, she's a young adult minister, and a young adult in her ministry, in her parish, called her because they're in a relationship. You wouldn't call that person if they, like if it was your doctor, you'd be like, oh, it's 8 p.m. I can't call my doctor. But you would call your minister, you would call someone you're in a relationship with, or text or whatever, and so it, kind of these buzzwords of ministry is relational. That's an example, an exact example of what it means to put the statistic aside. They can help us in addressing large trends, but when they put forward for us a way of ministering from a statistic, from a group of people somewhere, we're by and large going to lose all of those people right in front of us because we haven't heard them. And the one last thing that I will say is one of the things that I was listening to in building my summer course on youth and young adult spirituality. There was a group in Emory University that did one of these youth theology initiatives, one of the early ones, for like 4 weeks long, and that was the first one they ever did. And when they read the surveys of what young people thought was the biggest impact of this, like, theological, like, come on campus, you're a high school kid, come, experience college. And some were young adults, some were 18. The one experience that they said that they took away from that was the most meaningful was when the adult community paid attention to them, when they had the undivided attention of people in front of them as mentors. And that is a human longing. That's not a youth longing. That's a youth, young adult longing. We want, when we're in the presence of someone, we want them to know we're there, but our being, not just like, oh, my name, and so that to me really spoke volumes, is that's the need that Pope Francis is also talking about, and the young people are telling us too. So do we want to move on, or were there more questions? I'm more than happy to move us on. to kind of like go
Let's
into
get
that
into the
next
popular
section.
stuff.
Yeah, let's talk about the popular stuff. And I think Nick's coming back on for this one.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of questions surrounding, this phrasing of popular youth and young adult ministry. And I'll put up a couple of the quotes here, and then I'll go back to the image that we have. And I'll read them for you all if you like. He writes, allow room for a, quote, popular youth, and we'll add young adult because that's what he means both. Popular youth and young adult ministry with a different style, schedule, pace, and method, broader, more flexible, goes to those places where real young people are active. And then further on, he says, it tries to avoid imposing obstacles, rules, controls, and obligatory structures on these young believers who are natural leaders in their neighborhoods and in other settings. So I want to see who's going to flush this out for us, guys.
I think it would be helpful because the language that the document was written in is Spanish. Like Pope Francis wrote it in Spanish to start. So I think I'd like to lean a little bit on our friend Darius here. Can you kind of help us a little bit more? I mean, again, it can't hurt to hear it again. What popular ministry is about? Like, what does he mean? Is this ministry where the popular kids get to go to? Because I totally would not be welcome there.
The cool young adult minister.
Not at all. This is one of those pastoral practice things that I will recommend for anybody in ministry. Find a Spanish speaker friend and read this document with them. There are certain things that do not translate well. Actually, I'll use the first example, just the name of this chapter. In English, it just reads youth ministry. In Spanish, it reads La Pastoral de los Jóvenes, which is a very different concept. It's the ministry of the young people. So not only is it more inclusive when we're talking about age range generation, it's not youth ministry the way we think of it. It's the ministry of the young people. They are the agents of this ministry. And popular is another term that kind of loses some of its meaning. Popular means of the people. It's of the young people, by the young people, for the young people. And so when we put it into that context, it really becomes important to understand that this is not a ministry that is exclusive or meant to be for a particular group. It's really a ministry that's coming from them. It's coming from their reality, which is why he talks so much about the importance of empowering them and equipping them. He focuses on leadership, that they already have these skills. And so how are we drawing those out and allowing them for use for the larger community, for the good, for the mission of what we do? And I think this is one of the more challenging parts of this, because it really is sort of moving us away from us as the ministers being the agents of ministry to us saying, how are we empowering these young people to do the work, to do the actual ministry? And I think this is where cultural context is important, because here in the US context, we really do have a stronger institutional understanding of church. When we talk about church, we often are thinking about the institution, the hierarchy, the structure. But I think from what Pope Francis is pointing from, he's really understanding the church of being of the people. It's the church at the base, at the ground level, the small community. And so I think that's why it's important to have these conversations in sort of an intercultural context, because some of that gets lost in translation, but some of it really does challenge us to sort of rethink the way that we understand how we're doing ministry with this particular audience.
Right, and to follow up, thank you, Darius. I think that's so critical. And even that second sentence in this chapter that talks about that how society has, in the English version, says society has affected the ministry, and really it's that the ministry has suffered from society, etc. In really negative ways. There's lots of translation issues here from the Spanish. So please go talk to somebody who knows the Spanish, have that conversation. I think that this really moves us even further. If you look at and challenges us, especially in a US context, where we have a very developed youth ministry, a young adult ministry. Like we have compared to many places around the world, we have a very developed program of ministry for young people. But what he's saying here, one of the things that we've really done in that programming is that programming is always with the assumption that people are on their faith journey. And even it's an assumption that they are pretty well on their faith journey and have been on that journey for a long time, and that it's a program for people to come to the community, right? So one of the things he says here in this chapter is that the first movement is outreach, right? That's the first movement. But if you go to paragraph 234, I think you can't understand popular youth ministry without understanding this line in the middle of 234, where he says, some of our pastoral activities can assume that a journey of faith has already begun, but we need a popular youth ministry that can open doors and make room for everyone. Right? So it's okay that some of our pastoral activity assumes that faith is present, but that doesn't mean, that means that the rest of our pastoral activity has to assume that the faith isn't present. And a popular youth ministry, a popular young adult ministry, a popular ministry of, by, and for young people is one that's very broad, which is not how we've thought about ministry in a programmatic context in this country. And this really is going to stretch us. If we really want to implement this chapter, this is going to stretch us really far, because he's talking about very broad public ministry for young people. It's a public ministry for young people in much more, I would say, like a YMCA is a public ministry, and originally was for young people, right? But that's not how we've done things in the Catholic context in this country. But this really stretches us to think, okay, what are we offering for the public? Not are we offering for Catholics? What are we offering for the public? And that's a whole other realm of ministry that I don't think we've even begun to open up and explore. So.
And that's something that clearly says.
Oh, go ahead.
It's just something that, you know, those small faith communities and then community organizing has tried to do. The ones locally here before and after Katrina, you know, Jeremiah was one of them, and the Saul Alinsky groups, you know, they were getting the churches together to provide services for the community, you know, but it took a different organization to get the churches together. And what I'm hearing is that the churches have the agency and impetus to do them themselves, you know. So yeah, go ahead, Paul, sorry.
Well, in 234 and 235, you know, Pope Francis talks about how this popular type of ministry doesn't even mean, like you said, it's not Catholic. They don't have to accept all the church's teachings. They don't even have to be Christian. They don't have to have any religion. And if ministry was inclusive of those people, this is what it's talking about. And to, you know, I mean, in some respects, this is nothing new. I mean, Mother Teresa did this. I mean, Mother Teresa did not go into India to minister to the Catholics who were dying. She ministered to those who were dying. It did not matter their religion. You know, there were many Hindu and Buddhist and agnostic, atheist people who Mother Teresa had engaged with. Hers was a popular ministry of justice. So if we did that same thing, you know, of looking at how are we doing our ministry? Now, of course, I've set the bar really high. I've just told you you have to do young adult ministry like Mother Teresa, but it serves for us a great model, because Mother Teresa did exactly what Pope Francis is saying in 234. She didn't care what you believed. She didn't care who you were, where you were from, what your fault. I mean, you know, Pope Francis says it has to be open to with people with their doubts and frustrations, their problems and their efforts to find themselves, their past errors, their sin, and their difficulties. I mean, I think that the doubts and frustrations, I think, is first. We're living in this era of scandal in the church. There's a lot of people with doubts and frustrations that we can do anything, but we need to engage directly. So if somebody is spitting in your face, you have to sit there and say, you're the perfect person I want in my young adult ministry, because it looks different. And I you know, and again, I'm Mr. Institution. I'm looking for my hat.
The t-shirt's coming.
The t-shirt's coming. But even, I have to say, institutionally, we are set up for this. That is the way the church has existed from its beginning, is to minister to those outside the church walls. Why is young adult ministry any different? So it shouldn't be.
Yeah, and I think, tying in with what you were saying, Paul, about, Mother Teresa's approach to all of this, is I think in some components of the church, we are comfortable with that and feeding the hungry and, living out the works of mercy, that's fine. But I think a lot of this, I keep going back to the beginning here of these different styles of ministry. And that's something that we have to adjust to. So often when we're asked, as professional ministers, how many people attended your event? How many of them are our parishioners? How many of them are, so we look for those statistics. And in doing that, and there is some importance to that. I do understand that, there is part of that, the business aspect of it. But at the same time, if we really want to live that out, we have to kind of start tearing down those walls as well. And it's challenging. And that's an uphill battle that we have to start, fighting and really stick with, because that's when it gets really hard, is when, people are looking for these indicators of what ministry should look like. And then when it doesn't look like how they think it should, then, that's where we can get tripped up. So hopefully, the more that we do this, the more of us that do this, the more common this becomes. I think I know that's my prayer, and that's a goal. So
it's a challenge, because you think about, like, if I look at this, if you want to look at percentage of your time, and I'm not just pointing out to you, Diana, as a parish leader, but if you just look at statistics alone, and here I'm going back to the statistics, but let's just say we use that as a framework. So statistics say 15% of young adults are going to Mass regularly, which means 85% are not going regularly. If you equate that to your ministry, then 15% should be done to minister to those who are regular Mass-going active Catholics. And 85% of your work in young adult ministry then should be placed in this popular experience. So it's not to say you shouldn't do it. You should do the regular formatted ministry, but 15% of your time should be spent there. 85% of your time could be spent in this thing, which again is, if you were to sit there and say, do I do 85% of my time, is that spent out in this popular context? I don't know if it is, but I mean, for you perhaps, but who knows?
Well, and I would say that really does getting to the heart of, how does this affect us in our role as ministers? We also have to think too that part of our job, particularly if we're the ones who are in leadership in those ministries, isn't going to necessarily be to get out to all those peripheries on our own. Part of the investment is, how are we investing in our young adults to be the primary agents to go out to those peripheries? Because we're in the center. If we work for the church, if we're serving in the church, we are already at the heart of where that's at. We don't have the access, we don't have the ability, we don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to get out to those peripheries where those other young adults are. But the young adults that we are serving do. Like, that is where they work, that is where they serve, that is where their students at. And so part of our job has to be very intentionally to say, as I'm accompanying young adults who are part of my ministry, how am I equipping them to go out to those peripheries? And that can also be part of that 85%. It can be very
intentional. It doesn't mean you directly, but I think, but how are you empowering those to, sorry. So good correction, Darius, good correction.
Well, but I think it really does speak to, when, as we're kind of moving into the last theme, how does this change the role of the minister? I think we really have to think of the quality of the work that we do rather than the quantity. We often think of the numbers as being the most important thing, but we have to think of it as sort of a chain reaction. If we focus on 12, like Jesus did, and really equip them well to go out, that can change the world. But we have to do that piece really, really well for that to see fruit, especially on such a large scale.
So maybe we can ask if Nick could come back and join us for a moment. And really, I'd love to hear his perspective on what about us. And Darius has already kind of teased out some thoughts about what our role is. But Nick, as you read kind of the closing part of chapter 7, where it talks about our role, what to you is are you captivated most by in this?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a personal part where I'm captivated by the fact that it's really talking about necessary formation for ministry leaders, and that there is a great call to ongoing formation and training of the young adults, but also of the ministry leaders. And there's a very specific way that Pope Francis is really encouraging that formation, and it goes back to chapter 9. On discernment. So you can't read the part about who the adult accompaniers are without really understanding chapter 9, which is paragraphs 291 through 298, which is the very back of the book, or the very bottom of the document, because what he's really talking about there is how the formation that's necessary for us as ministers is to be accompaniers who have real sensitivities in listening, and real sensitivities in discernment with young people. And so I think he's being very clear here about what kind of adult accompaniers he wants to see the church have. And those are people who really are steeped in a tradition of discernment and listening, and not just that they're good conversationalists, but they really can help a young person to really reach deeper through that listening process. They're listening to them, and then they challenge them into growth in a number of different ways. And so that's really what this discernment part is. And so it's a different model of how we've often done formation and what kind of ministry leaders we've looked for in the field, right? This is not say, I want a bunch of ministry leaders who are really good at putting on amazing events. This is not saying I want ministry leaders who are really amazing teachers. Not that those things aren't important. I think those are all very important. But at the heart of what he's saying is that you have to first, in addition to doing those things, the first thing you have to do if you want to be an adult accompanier is to be someone who is really steeped in discernment and listening. That comes first. Then you can add on all those other things to what's going on there. But the first thing that has to happen in these formation programs and in our trainings is that we have to look for someone who has the heart of discernment and listening. And that's new. I don't think that's been our criteria before, but I think that the Pope really clearly is spelling out for us. This is the kind of person that needs to really walk into that role of being an accompanier. And so that's challenging, but exciting as well.
Yeah, in some respects, I mean, whenever I've been working in parishes or dioceses and I've asked people to step up into leadership, the first thing they say is, I don't know enough about theology. I don't know how to plan something. I'm not really good. And Pope Francis is saying, yeah, okay, whatever. Like the number one qualification is, do you have 2 ears and can you use them? And can you, now there is some formation of how to listen well. So I'm not saying that just anyone can, just if you can hear the sound of my voice, you can be a good listener, but it's a step. And it's definitely, it counters the notion that in order to be an accompanier in the community, you don't have to know your theology, because people do stop me and say, listen, the last time I took a theology class was like when I was in grade school or confirmation class, so I don't know anything about this stuff. So how could I really step forward? Or I'm really not good at planning big events. What you're saying is, well, yeah, you don't need to be. The first, and that helps with what Darius was saying, is getting those people, those young adults and other adults in the community to listen and to go out there and to be present. They can get those skills much more. And if they want to go for more education or they want to learn how to plan big events, that's fine. But the first step would be to step forward if they're willing to listen and to accompany and to go out. So I think that Pope Francis is saying to all those volunteers who once used to say to me, I can't do it because I can't do these things. He's saying, so what? Can you listen? Then that's all you need.
It's like putting on the hat permanently of a mentor, and he has a whole section on what it means to be a mentor. But, in an educational context, particularly if you're a high school teacher, if you're a college teacher, high school teachers, especially teaching seniors, you get very close with those young people. Then they go off to college and they will write to you as a young adult and they will tell you about your experiences, because they remember you in their life as someone who cared. Do they remember the reason why the filioque is written the way that it is, in theology? Maybe not, but they will remember the impact that the human had on them that spent 3 or 4 years of their life helping them, walking alongside them in an educational context, and so this doesn't, like Paul, you were saying before, we have all these structures. We can work within these structures to be mentors, to accompany, to listen, be the teacher that puts listening first, and when that student comes into your office that has not, or writes you an email, the young adult in college or whatever that has not been very attentive at all ever, finally comes to you and says, what can I do to get my grade up? Mm-hmm. Take that as a moment of transformative encounter. And that takes formation of the person, of the minister. And that's what I was hearing Nick talk about. That takes being able to step aside from how you feel in that moment and saying, this person in front of me right here is showing me in some way the face of Christ, and how am I showing that back? In what way can I take a very challenging experience, a person's failing grade or whatever it is, and make sure that that person is accompanied on a faith journey, not an intellectual journey only, And so, yeah, I wanted to add that, what I was hearing from you all from that. It's up to you guys. Are there any other comments or from our audience that wanted to chime in? To ask any additional questions for us? We did have one, and it is kind of the slide here. We had one that came in through the registration link, and I think we had talked about being more of a listening church. Once we invite young people in, why do we have to keep listening? And I wondered if maybe just this phrase from number 292 would kind of encapsulate that. And I throw it out to the team if you wanted to give a response to, what do we do if we're done listening? the we're done listening part. We've listened, now what? Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things that I like about the Emmaus story being an example is that the Emmaus story takes place after the resurrection. So Jesus had spent 3 years listening and listening and listening. He died, he rose again. He didn't need to listen anymore. And so what is the most famous story of listening that we have to have? The Emmaus story. So just when Jesus was done listening throughout his public ministry, he decided one of the first things he would do after the resurrection is listen some more. So frankly, if it's good enough for Jesus to keep on listening when even after you're dead and rose again in his case, then I can't stop myself from, just when I think I've just exhausted myself to death listening to people, one of the things, in a practical sense, young youth and young adults are constantly changing. We have micro generations. So just if you listened 3 years ago, chances are you'll probably need to listen again, because the trends of young people are changing that quickly. And so just when you heard it, the scandal that had happened last year, how you listen to people after that tragic event and before that are going to be radically different. If there's other critical events in the life of the world and the life of the church that happen, people's perspectives change. And even the topics change. Somebody might want, people's lives change quickly nowadays. You have a new job, you have a new career, you have a new, significant other, so things do change. And so now listening to them with that new reality is going to be helpful. So I think we have to continue to listen, no matter, even if we think we're done, because, again, that builds credibility with people to know that you're constantly listening, because it's not like, if I kept listening to you, Tracy, if you told me all the stuff in the world and then I didn't listen to you ever again, it's not like your life paused at that point and you didn't grow then. You have new things that you want to share then. So you have new stories. If Darius is, when Darius said about stories, there's new stories to tell.
And you're not in relationship anymore. I'm done listening. The relationship.
Ah.
If ministry is relational, you continue to listen because you are in a relationship with that person. And so to me, the question is starting to sound like listening is a program instead of an actual practice. That's what I just was hearing as you said all that.
That's the program, if there's any program to start with. That's it.
Get with the program. The program's listening.
Yeah, listening is not just programs. It's not just surveys. It's not just questionnaires that come out when somebody says we should do it. It's an ongoing relationship. It's, hey, I care about you. I want to know what's going on in your life. And I want to know, you know, I value you as a person, and I want to, and I want to hear about your life, and I want to hear about what's going on. And if there's something that I can do to be with you in that, that's the beauty of it. So it's not just doing it when we're told to do it, but, you know, because we value a person, we value a relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to be mindful of our time here. And Darius, if you wanted to add anything else, please feel free. If anybody has, any of our panelists or any of our audience has any final questions or comments, I'm going to leave it to you now. I'm going to put up our thank you screen. But please feel free. Any final words from any of us?
So I just want to add, I know one of the other questions that came up was how to sort of enter into this in a diverse cultural context. And so just a couple of quick things to keep in mind. This document is already very diverse. It is pulling from letters and bishop conferences and from all over the world. And so there's a lot of diversity that you already find that's woven into this. And Pope Francis, I think, was very intentional in wanting to highlight not just saints from different cultures and communities, but also quotes and ideas that have come from all over the globe. And like I said earlier, it's great to read with someone else of a different cultural context, or somebody who speaks a different language, because some of the context also changes too. He spends a lot of time talking about movements. That ties in very well to the whole popular ministry thing. We don't have a lot of experiences of movements here in the United States, but that's a huge part of how ministry is being done with young adults all over the world. And I think that just kind of broadens our horizons. I would say in our US context too, we have a lot of sort of interchanging of the words youth and young adults, and we know that those are two very different audiences. And so it's important to read this together with those who are working with adolescents, but also to read it separately because we have to interpret it in a very different way. And I think that also is reflected back in our cultural realities as well. And then finally, I think it's really important to read it with the young adults themselves. This is a letter that's written to them for them. And though Pope Francis goes out of his way to include and sort of do some sidebars to make sure he's talking to us in the church, those who minister into the church, this is still a letter that's written for young adults. And so by engaging them in the conversation, by inviting them to really read it on their own, I think it really gives them an opportunity to really hear from the Holy Father himself where he's calling us to all go as church. And I think that's one of the best gifts of this entire thing, is that it really is meant for young adults to read this and to respond to it, and then to help us live it out as a church today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the process, you know, one of the nice things is, and this might segue into the final thing, is that the process is not over. You know, coming up in a couple of weeks, Pope Francis is going to gather with several hundred young adults in Rome to ask him their input of how the document is being received in their home countries, and whether it is. And so in a way, this journey is still going on. And you know, and actually, we're going to have a survey that we're going to send out through the network here, that we'd love for you to pass on to young people to see how they're receiving the document. And if they are receiving the document, there's an option that if you know young people who say, what document, what's that all about, that's good for us. We would like to share that with the Holy Father when we're in Rome. I'll be accompanying there's that talk again, accompanying and mentoring several young adults who will be there with the Holy Father. And so when we present that about how the document is being received in our country, we'd like to be able to share what that is. So give it to a young adult, then maybe ask them what they think about it, and then tell us what they thought about it. So that would be, and the journey is continuing both internationally, but then now also locally. locally. And I'd love to hear, and I think all of us would love to hear, how in various ways you're implementing perhaps a chapter, a paragraph, or the whole document in your parish, your diocese, your community. We'd love to hear stories and then share those with others who are looking to hear what's working and what doesn't in the implementation of this. So really the ball is in all of our courts now to be able to try and figure out ways that this can practically happen in our local context. And I look forward to hearing that, because that's where I get really excited about hearing. The Pope is exciting, believe me, he is. But what's really exciting is when putting the Pope's words into action in your local community. Now that I will stand in line for all day.
Yeah, and I think Carlos just put a question in there, and I think that goes to a little bit of what he's asking is, how do we make our parishes more youth and young adult friendly and engaging? And I think that some of these ways is to take the initiative and get parish staff and leadership in schools and in parishes, get them together, kind of like what we talked about, like how we go through that process of self-criticism to the other question, get them together and really, and again, use national dialogue, use this, use a guidebook with Christus Vivit with them, maybe go into a book study, something like that, but get them together and talking about this so that they can reimagine the vision, re-envision the mission of the parish, and make everything young adult friendly, especially when it comes to RCIA, marriage preparation, baptism, things like that. If you have a lens on of accompanying young adults through their life in every single program that already exists in the parish, then you've already started the movement, that it takes to really become more friendly towards young adults. So I wanted to honor, we were asking for questions the whole time, and I wanted to honor that last question that came in. And I also want to just turn quickly that the next sessions of webinars will be, if you can see the website link above, there's going to be an English and a Spanish session coming up very soon, next week, Tuesday. And it's going to be the Emmaus journey from pre-synod to exhortation in Spanish and English. And then if you click on the series that Paul puts out from his office, he has a whole series of links that come after this. So we'll make sure you're checking the USCCB websites, NFCYM, Catholic Apostolate Center, CEPI. They're all doing a webinar series throughout the summer. So definitely check back with them. And I wanted to let you all know we have a survey. Nick put it up there in the chat bar. We have results from the last couple surveys that we have on topics, ways to improve, one of which was to host an evening one. So we did that tonight. And then otherwise, list of topics that you want to hear. And we have a good list already going. I just sent to the team this afternoon. So please fill out the survey at any point. I don't care when you fill it out. If you have any topics, copy and paste this anywhere. If you ever come up with a topic, either just email me, reply to those registration links, or fill it out in the survey. If you want to hear anything, in these webinars that we think we need to address in young adult ministry, please let us know. And we're here for you as a resource for all of you. And so finally, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We tried to wrap it up as best we could within an hour and a half. We try to keep them to an hour, but you can't get this group to do anything in an hour without talking too much. But it's lovely because I love you all. But if you want to know more about your faith and ministry and theology, you're welcome to come study with us at Loyola Institute for Ministry, where I teach, which I love. So email me if you're ever curious about that. Our program's completely online, and we also have non-campus program here too. So thank you all for joining us today. Paul, any last words as the big bad director of our team? Diana, the chair, you're all welcome to join in. Welcome to thanking everyone.
Just thank you.
Thank you. And to echo the Pope's last words in Christus Vivit, thank you for your patience. Be patient with us while we catch up, and have patience with each other. This is a long slog journey. The Holy Father said it in paragraph 299, the last paragraph. Just have some patience. We're going to get through this. It's going to be wonderful. What's amazing, what's ahead. So thank you all.
And thank you all. Great seeing you too.
Blessings.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, guys.